I want you to picture a scene with me for a second.
Go ahead.
We are in ancient China. The year is like roughly 512 BC.
Right.
And the setting is this lavish, sun-drenched courtyard of a royal palace in the state of Wu.
Sounds peaceful.
It does, right. But you have this ancient Chinese philosopher standing in the center of the courtyard, and he's not holding a bamboo scroll or preaching to students.
No, definitely not.
He is actually surrounded by 180 terrified royal concubines.
Yeah, they're not exactly ready for combat.
Not at all. They are dressed in these fine silks, but right now their hands are just awkwardly gripping heavy wooden halberds and battle axes.
Which is a wild image.
It really is. And up in a raised pavilion, looking down at this whole bizarre spectacle, is King Holu.
Right, the guy who started this whole mess.
Exactly. And the philosopher down in the courtyard, he has just ordered the execution of the king's two absolute favorite concubines.
Right in front of him.
Right in front of him. Just to prove a point about absolute authority.
It is, it's one of the most brutal, cinematic, and shocking job interviews in recorded human history.
Job interview. That's such a good way to put it.
Because that's what it was.
Right.
And the man conducting this bloody symphony is Sun Tzu, the legendary author of The Art of War.
The ultimate military strategist.
Exactly. But he ordered those executions to prove a point about military discipline.
Right.
But the real twist here, and this is what we're going to get into today, is that Sun Tzu might not have even existed.
Oh, wait, really? The guy who wrote the most famous military manual ever?
Yeah, it's a huge debate. To find out who really wrote this book, we have to, look past all the modern business bro adaptations.
Oh, yeah, the ones you see in every airport bookstore.
Right, those. We have to dig into a very specific set of sources for this deep dive.
Which are fascinating on their own, by the way.
They really are. We're looking at a furious British scholar's 1910 English translation, a forgotten 9th century poet, and honestly, the agonizing process of digitizing ancient Chinese characters for the early internet.
It's such a weird mix of materials. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's do it. Because we take for granted today that we could just, walk into a bookstore or pull the PDF and read The Art of War.
Right, it's everywhere.
But the journey of these 13 chapters from like bamboo slips in ancient China to a digital text file on your screen, it's a story of academic fistfights.
Literally academic fistfights.
Yeah, and massive historical blind spots and a centuries-long debate about the morality of slaughter in what was supposed to be a pacifist culture.
So before we get to the concubines and the beheadings, we need to talk about the translation wars. Because the academic drama behind the scenes here is wildly entertaining.
It's so petty, but so important.
Right. Because for centuries, this book was completely unknown in Europe. Like, nobody knew about it.
Yeah, it wasn't until 1782.
Right. A French Jesuit father named Joseph Amiot.
Amiot, yes.
He was living in China, got his hands on a copy, and translated it into French. But our main source for this deep dive, the British sinologue Lionel Giles, he paints that early French translation as a total disaster.
Oh, he completely trashes it. But what's fascinating here is you have to look at Amiot's context.
Okay, lay it out for us.
He is a Jesuit priest in the late 18th century. He's trying to present Chinese culture to a European audience that is, fascinated by the Orient.
Right, it was all very exotic to them.
Exactly.
Cool.
But they possess zero foundational understanding of Taoist philosophy or ancient Chinese statecraft.
So they wouldn't understand a direct translation anyway.
Exactly. So Amiot didn't just translate it, he curated it.
He meddled with it.
He really did. Giles notes that Amiot omitted vast chunks of Sun Tzu's actual tactical advice.
Just left it out entirely.
Yeah, just skipped it. And then he padded the text with material that Sun Tzu absolutely did not write.
Wait, he just added his own stuff?
Well, he was likely pulling from later, lesser military treatises to make it sound more cohesive to, a French military mind.
It's the classic trap, right? Trying to make a foreign text palatable to your home audience, and in the process, you're completely destroying the actual text.
Exactly. It's not Sun Tzu anymore. It's Amiot's version of what a Chinese general should sound like.
Like terrible Hollywood adaptations of a beloved book.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Where the director is like, you know what? I'm just going to make up my own ending because the test audience will like it better.
Right, and the fans of the book are screaming at the screen.
Exactly. But the real friction, the moment Lionel Giles essentially declares academic war, happens with the very first English translation.
Oh, Captain Calthrop.
Yes. This was published in 1905 in Tokyo by a British military officer named Captain E.F. Calthrop. And Giles, who is sitting in the Department of Oriental Printed Books and Manuscripts at the British Museum.
Very prestigious.
He reads Calthrop's translation and goes completely scorched earth.
He was horrified.
Yeah.
Like fundamentally offended.
Yeah. He publishes his own translation in 1910, and his introduction is essentially this massive, scholarly diss track aimed at Calthrop.
It's so funny to read now.
It is. Giles accuses him of frequent omissions, of willfully distorting hard passages.
Because Calthrop just couldn't be bothered to figure out the grammar.
Right. Giles basically says he slurred over the difficult Chinese phrasing. But I'm struggling with Giles here a little bit.
Why is that?
To me, he sounds like a jealous academic gatekeeper throwing a tantrum.
Sure, I could see that.
Like, was Calthrop's work actually dangerous to the survival of the text? Or was this just a bruised ego from a guy sitting in a museum who was mad that a military captain beat him to the punch?
Well, it's easy to read Giles as just being petty, right?
Yeah.
But his anger actually stems from a much deeper ideological place.
Okay, tell me more.
Giles was fighting for the intellectual dignity of Chinese philosophy.
That's a big claim.
It is, but think about it. In 1910, European academia largely viewed Eastern texts through this lens of extreme condescension.
They were just neat little trinkets.
Exactly. They treated them as novelties, not serious scholarship.
Yeah.
And Giles points out that if a Western scholar translated Homer or Aristotle the way Calthrop translated Sun Tzu,
Oh, just skipping the hard sentences.
yeah, just skipping stuff and making up the rest, they would be laughed out of the university system entirely.
Ah, I see. So it's a double standard.
A massive double standard. Giles believed that a standard of absolute honesty and rigor had to be applied to Chinese texts, just like Greek or Latin.
Okay, that makes sense. So he saw Calthrop's sloppy translation as a form of cultural disrespect.
Precisely. It wasn't just bad translation. It was a symptom of a larger academic arrogance.
So Giles takes it upon himself to create the definitive edition.
And he really goes all out.
He does. He produces this incredibly dense book packed with the original Chinese characters, the English translation, and voluminous, exhausting footnotes.
Oh, the footnotes are legendary.
It becomes the gold standard. But this introduces a massive technological hurdle a century later, which brings us to Bob Sutton.
Right, Bob Sutton is such a fascinating figure in this lineage.
For those who don't know, explain what Sutton was trying to do.
Well, he is the person who took on the Herculean task of converting Giles's massive, character-heavy 1910 book into a digital text file.
This was in the early days of the internet, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the crazy part, Sutton didn't even speak Chinese.
Which is wild.
It is, and he was working with early ASCII formats.
Oh man, ASCII. That takes me back.
Right, and ASCII couldn't handle traditional Chinese typography. It definitely couldn't handle the complex Wade-Giles romanization system that Giles used in his footnotes.
Sutton actually wrote about this process, and you can feel his agony in the text.
You really can. He's so stressed out.
He had to convert this incredibly nuanced text into standard Latin alphabet text. So he faced the difficult task of paraphrasing Giles's highly specific linguistic notes while trying to retain the meaning.
Which is almost impossible.
It is. And Sutton knew that every time he paraphrased a footnote because the computer couldn't render the character, he was actively contributing to a loss of information.
Which breaks his heart, honestly, because translation, and by extension digitization, is always a game of sacrifice.
You're always losing something.
Always. Sutton comes away feeling a sense of loss, hoping someone better equipped with better technology will come along later to improve upon his work.
It's a stark contrast to the arrogance of the earlier translators like Amiot or Calthrop.
Exactly. Sutton knew what he was losing, the others just didn't care.
It's wild to think about. I mean, for you listening, think about how much of the media you consume daily.
Or tons.
Yeah, world news, foreign films, translated literature is filtered through a translator or an editor making those exact same sacrifices.
It really shapes your worldview without you even knowing it.
Exactly. One excessively bad translation can literally skew an entire culture's understanding of a masterpiece for decades.
Which is exactly why Giles felt such an intense moral obligation to protect the literal words of Sun Tzu.
But, and this is the craziest part of the whole thing, it's ironic that Giles spent years furiously protecting the exact wording of a man who might have been a complete phantom.
The ghost of Sun Tzu.
Right, because before we get into the actual military strategy, we have to look at the explosive biography of the author himself, as recorded by the ancient historian Sima Qian.
Let's go back to that courtyard in 512 BC.
Yes, let's set the stage again. Ho Lu, the king of the Wu state, has read Sun Tzu's 13 chapters.
And he's impressed, but he's, a bit skeptical.
Right. The king basically tells Sun Tzu, this is great theory, but can you actually manage soldiers?
Can I test your theories on a small scale?
Exactly. And Sun Tzu agrees. Then the king, perhaps testing Sun Tzu's patience, or perhaps just making a joke of the whole affair, asks if the test can be applied to women.
Which is such a bizarre request.
It is. But Sun Tzu, without missing a beat, says, you may.
He doesn't even flinch.
And this is where the story shifts from a polite philosophical debate into a psychological thriller.
It gets so dark so fast.
The king brings out 180 ladies from the palace. Sun Tzu divides them into two companies. He places the king's two absolute favorite concubines at the head of each company as the commanding officers.
Which is a terrible idea for chain of command, obviously.
A total setup for failure. He hands them spears. He asks them if they know their left from their right, their front from their back. They say yes.
So they understand the basic physical concepts.
Right. The drums start beating, and he gives a simple military order. Right turn.
And what happens?
The women burst out laughing.
Because to them, this is just absurd. They are palace ladies playing a game for the king's amusement.
Exactly. But Sun Tzu doesn't yell. He doesn't lose his temper.
He's incredibly cold about it.
So cold. He simply states his first rule of command. He says, if words of command are not clear and distinct, if orders are not thoroughly understood, then the general is to blame.
He takes total ownership of the failure.
He assumes he didn't explain the drill well enough, so he patiently explains it again. The drums beat. He gives the order, left turn.
Let me guess.
Yep.
Again, the women fall into fits of laughter.
And this is where the trap snaps shut.
Boo!
Sun Tzu introduces his second rule, which is, honestly, the cornerstone of his entire philosophy on discipline.
What's the rule?
He says, if words of command are not clear and distinct, the general is to blame. But if his orders are clear, and the soldiers nevertheless disobey, then it is the fault of their officers.
Oh, man.
And immediately, he orders the two favorite concubines, the commanding officers, to be beheaded.
Just like that. It's like a failing CEO bringing in a ruthless turnaround consultant.
That is a great analogy.
Right. The CEO says, do whatever it takes to fix the company. The consultant walks into the boardroom, looks around, and immediately fires the CEO's two best friends.
And the CEO completely loses it.
Exactly. The king, watching this unfold from his pavilion, completely panics. He sends a frantic message down to the courtyard saying, wait, I am quite satisfied with your ability. If I lose these two concubines, my meat and drink will lose their savor.
My meat and drink will lose their savor. What a line.
Basically, I'll be depressed. Please do not behead them.
It is like a turnaround consultant, but with a crucial difference.
What's that?
This consultant operates under the threat of his own execution if he fails to produce results.
Oh, that's true. If the army fails, Sun Tzu dies.
Exactly. And he's executing the board members to prove a point to the CEO. So when the king's messenger arrives, Sun Tzu delivers what might be the greatest mic drop in military history.
Oh, I love this part.
He looks up at the pavilion and says, having once received His Majesty's commission to be the general of his forces, there are certain commands of His Majesty which, acting in that capacity, I am unable to accept.
You give me the badge. Step back.
Literally. He is stating, unequivocally, that once the civilian leader gives the military commander the authority to wage war, the civilian leader must surrender control.
Wow.
The battlefield is governed by its own immutable laws, and the commander answers only to victory, not to the king's personal feelings or, political comfort.
So he executes the two favorite concubines right there in the courtyard.
Right there.
He replaces them with the next two women in line, and then he starts the drill again.
Well, this time.
Sima Qian records that the remaining women went through all the evolutions, turning, marching, kneeling with perfect accuracy and precision, not venturing to utter a single sound.
Silence in the courtyard.
Absolute silence. Sun Tzu sends a message to the king saying, your soldiers are ready. Bid them go through fire and water, and they will not disobey.
The king, to his credit, eventually processes his grief, realizes the terrifying genius he has on his hands, and makes Sun Tzu his commanding general.
And it pays off, doesn't it?
The historical payoff here is massive. The state of Wu, under Sun Tzu's leadership, goes on to completely dismantle the powerful neighboring Chu state.
They just wreck them.
Yeah, eventually forcing their way into the enemy capital, Ying. It sets the absolute baseline for why Sun Tzu was feared and respected across all of ancient China.
The story is incredible. It's so visceral.
But
Reading the critical notes, it becomes clear that in the academic world, this story is almost too incredible.
it really hits all the narrative beats of a perfect myth.
Exactly. Which brings us to the massive historical blind spot. Did Sun Tzu, this specific man who beheaded the concubines and sacked the capital, did he even exist?
Because the historical records suggest he might be a total fabrication.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. How could he be a fabrication?
The primary argument against his existence lies in a glaring omission in a text called the Sichuan.
What's the Sichuan?
It is the greatest, most granular contemporary historical record of the spring and autumn period in ancient China. It is a massive, year-by-year chronicle of everything that happened.
Okay, so it's like the official state logbook.
Exactly. And it mentions totally obscure people.
Yeah.
As one later critic put it, it mentions vulgar plebeians and hireling ruffians.
It's extremely detailed.
Extremely. It lists mid-level politicians, minor diplomatic slights, tiny border skirmishes.
Yeah.
But in all its volumes covering this exact time period, it makes zero mention of a legendary state-saving general named Sun Tzu.
Which is insane. If a guy took a bunch of palace ladies, turned them into a lethal fighting force in an afternoon, and then led your army to sack the enemy capital, someone is jotting his name down in the official state records.
Right. The silence is deafening.
So what do the skeptics say about this?
Well, this omission fueled immense skepticism, most notably from a 12th century critic named Ye Shuixin.
What was his argument?
He brings up a devastating structural critique. He argues that the entire concept of a professional general didn't even exist during the era when Sun Tzu supposedly lived.
Oh, wait, there were no generals.
Not professional ones. In that early period, military commanders were statesmen first. They were aristocratic civil officials who occasionally led armies of conscripted farmers.
Oh, so there were politicians who moonlit as commanders.
Exactly. The idea of a specialized, pure military genius who held no civil office, who wrote a dedicated manual purely on tactics, Ye Shuixin says that's an anachronism.
Doesn't fit the time period.
Right. He calls the entire concubine story the reckless fabrication of theorizing pundits.
Oh, wow. He's arguing that later scholars basically wrote a really good strategy guide, but they knew nobody would buy a strategy guide from an anonymous bureaucrat.
So they invented a badass origin story centuries later to sell the book.
That's amazing. It's like marketing in the ancient world.
Yeah.
But Giles doesn't buy that skepticism, right?
Not at all. Giles mounts a massive defense to prove the text, at least, is genuinely ancient.
How does he prove it?
He looks at the internal textual evidence, and it's compelling. First, he traces the lineage of plagiarism.
Plagiarism.
Yeah. The text of The Art of War was heavily quoted and repurposed by subsequent ancient writers, most notably a famous, highly documented general named Wu Qi, who died in 381 BC.
Okay, so if Wu Qi is quoting the text...
The text had to exist well before the late 5th century BC.
Got it.
Second, Giles points out linguistic artifacts. The text contains archaic and obsolete words that a later forger simply wouldn't have known to use.
Okay, that makes sense. But the technological clues are what really anchor it in time for me.
Oh, the chariot.
Yes. The text heavily features the use of armored chariots in battle formations. It talks about the specific logistics of repairing chariots and integrating them into troop movements.
Which is a huge clue, because the extensive use of armored chariots completely died out before the end of the Zhou dynasty.
Warfare evolved, right?
Exactly. States moved toward massive infantry formations and, eventually, cavalry. A later forger, writing hundreds of years after the fact, wouldn't have centered their foundational military manual on completely obsolete technology.
It would be like someone today writing a modern manual on cyber warfare and dedicating 3 chapters to maintaining a fleet of Zeppelins.
That is exactly what it would be like.
It just doesn't make any sense.
And there are geopolitical dating clues buried in the text, too.
Like what?
Well, Sun Tzu casually mentions the state of Yu. There's a specific line outlining troop formations where he says, the men of Wu and the men of Yu are enemies.
And we know when that rivalry happened.
We do. We know the exact historical window when Wu and Yue were locked in a death struggle. It was a very specific, intense rivalry between 505 and 473 BC.
That's a really tight window.
It is. Before that period, Wu was focused on fighting a different state entirely, the Chu. And after 473 BC, the state of Wu was completely destroyed by Yu.
So the book had to have been written in that tight 30-year historical window when the Wu-Yu rivalry was the dominant geopolitical fact of life.
Exactly. The book is real, it's undeniably ancient, and it perfectly matches the technology and politics of 500 BC.
But the man who supposedly wrote it still isn't in the official logs. So how do we reconcile the real book with the ghost author?
Giles leans toward the most plausible historical theory. There probably was a brilliant military mind named Sun Tzu, but he wasn't the supreme commander. He was likely a subordinate officer.
Ah, tactician behind the scenes.
Right. A brilliant tactician whose brain conceived and planned the great capture of the enemy capital. But because he wasn't a high-ranking aristocrat or a prominent statesman, the official aristocratic historians of the Zhuan just ignored him.
Snobbery.
Pure snobbery. Over time, as his tactical manual circulated and became famous, popular history elevated him to a mythical status. The culture likely combined his real strategic brilliance with the exploits of other higher-ranking generals of the era and wrapped it all in the dramatic concubine story.
It forces you to question how history is curated, you know? Like, is history an accurate log of facts, or is it a collection of compelling narratives that stick to the cultural consciousness?
It's usually the latter.
The concubine story survived because it's an unforgettable lesson in authority, regardless of whether it actually happened in that courtyard.
Exactly. But if Sun Tzu the man is a ghost, how did his words survive the centuries?
That's a great question.
They survived because they were grafted onto the minds of the people who actually fought the wars. The text didn't float perfectly through time. It was carried, protected, and explained by a fascinating lineage of commentators.
And there is a weird mystery about the text itself before you even get to the commentator.
Oh, the 82 chapters.
Yeah. In a bibliography from the Han Dynasty, which is much later, it lists the works of Sun Tzu as having 82 chapters. But today, Giles is only translating 13 chapters. What happened to the other 69?
They were almost certainly forgeries.
Just fake chapters.
Yeah. During the centuries after Sun Tzu's death, a luxuriant crop of what scholars call apocryphal writings grew up like weeds around the original text.
Why would people do that?
Because the core 13 chapters were so highly regarded, people wanted more Sun Tzu. So other writers happily invented more.
Fan fiction.
Basically ancient military fan fiction, yeah. These fake chapters were usually formatted as long, tedious Q&A sessions between Sun Tzu and the king, elaborating on very specific, localized tactics that completely lacked the universal philosophy of the original 13 chapters.
Okay, so how did the core 13 chapters survive the influx of all those fakes? How did we figure out what was real?
We owe a massive debt to early Chinese encyclopedias, like the Tongqian and the Yulan, which quoted the genuine text extensively, providing a baseline.
Right.
But the text was truly rescued by an 18th century antiquarian named Sun Xingyan.
And he had a personal connection, right?
He actually claimed to be a direct descendant of Sun Tzu.
Wow!
Yeah. He found a lost, highly accurate original copy of the text in a remote temple library, and he spent years cross-referencing it to clear out all the mistakes and later additions.
But the real heroes who shaped how we actually understand the philosophy of the book are the 11 commentators.
Absolutely.
These are historical figures spanning hundreds of years who wrote notes, arguments, and explanations directly into the margins of the text.
And we rely on them so much.
But honestly, why does a 13-chapter book need 11 different historical commentators? Isn't the point of a military manual to be straightforward?
You'd think so.
Like, put the archers here, attack the flank at dawn. Why is there a need for so much layered interpretation?
It's a valid point. And the great Sung Dynasty scholar Ouyang Xiu asked that exact same question.
And what was his answer?
His answer is incredibly profound. He wrote that the artifices of war, being inexhaustible, must therefore be susceptible of treatment in a great variety of ways.
The artifices of war being inexhaustible.
Yes, the art of war is not a tactical manual like a modern field guide.
It's not a how-to book.
No, it is an incredibly dense philosophical treatise on human nature, resource management, deception, and conflict.
So it's broad.
Very broad. Because the writing is so compressed and profound, it requires a living tradition of interpretation, much like a religious text or a constitution.
You can't just read it literally.
Exactly. You have to apply its abstract principles to the changing anxieties, geography, and technologies of your own era. And the commentators were the military leaders and scholars who built that bridge across the centuries.
These commentators are wild characters in their own right, too. The most famous one has to be Sun Tzu, who lived in the 2nd century AD.
Cao Cao is fascinating.
The sources describe him as a Napoleonic military genius.
He is a legendary warlord. He essentially divided the failing Han Empire and carved out his own kingdom.
Which is no small feat.
Not at all. The historical consensus was that generals who used Cao Cao's battle plans rarely lost.
Wow.
He is the one who wrote the very first commentary on Sun Tzu. But his commentary is infamous for its austere brevity.
He wrote almost nothing, right?
He wrote exactly like the stern, fast-moving, ruthless commander he was. He didn't have time for poetry or philosophical musings.
Give us an example.
So when Sun Tzu writes a cryptic line, Cao Cao's note is usually like 3 words long.
Okay.
For example, Sun Tzu writes, "When the enemy is at ease, be able to weary him."
Very philosophical.
Right. And Cao Cao's official commentary on how to achieve this profound strategic goal, by cutting off his supplies.
Brutally pragmatic.
Exactly. But also, if you aren't a seasoned general, that brevity is almost as confusing as the original text.
Right. It doesn't help me much if I don't know how to cut off the supplies.
Exactly. Which is the total opposite of our next guy, Tu Mu, who lived in the 9th century.
Right. Tu Mu.
Tu Mu was a brilliant poet, a scholar of the literati class, but he had absolutely zero practical military experience.
A desk jockey.
A total desk jockey. Yet he writes these incredibly long, copious notes on the text.
So how did he interpret that same line?
Tu Mu would take that same line from Sun Tzu and write a sweeping paragraph about a historical battle from 300 years prior, detailing how a specific general lured an enemy army into a swamp to exhaust them.
Oh, so he loves the narrative.
He loves it. Tu Mu actually attacked Cao Cao's commentary.
Wait, he called out the legendary warlord?
He did. He claimed that Cao Cao, being a paranoid warlord, was intentionally writing overly brief notes to hide the true meaning of the text so he could keep the best strategies for himself.
That is such a poet thing to say. He's hiding his feelings.
Right. Tu Mu believed war required a mix of benevolence, artifice, and historical awareness.
Okay, so we have the paranoid warlord and the expansive poet. But the commentator who truly synthesized this text for regular readers was Chang Yu.
Chang Yu is the unsung hero of the tradition.
What did he do?
He looked at Cao's brutally short, confusing notes, and he realized the genius hidden inside them. Chang Yu used his powers of lucid, masterly exposition to actually explain what the warlord meant.
He decoded it.
Yes. He expanded the terse notes into plain language. Without Chang Yu, Cao Cao's greatest insights might have remained completely locked away in obscurity.
It's exactly like having a brilliant but completely uncommunicative physics professor who just writes a complex equation on the chalkboard and walks out.
We've all had that professor.
Right. And then you have the dedicated teaching assistant who stays behind and actually translates the professor's genius into plain English so you can pass the exam.
That is Chang Yu.
Each of these 11 commentators brought their own worldview to the text, layering it with centuries of Chinese thought.
But the presence of scholars and poets like Tu Mu brings up a massive historical and philosophical contradiction.
This is the part that I found so confusing at first. How on earth did they reconcile studying a book about deception, slaughter, and warfare in a culture that was so deeply rooted in the pacifist teachings of Lao Tzu and Confucius?
This is one of the most profound paradoxes in Chinese history.
Walk us through it.
On one hand, China historically viewed itself as a peace-loving nation, governed by the high moral philosophy of Confucianism.
Which despised violence, right?
Completely. It prioritized social harmony and filial piety. The ideal man was a scholar, not a soldier.
Right.
On the other hand, as our sources point out, China has a uniquely bloody, continuous military history. The clash of arms literally never ceased.
It's a huge country with a lot of borders.
Exactly. They were maintaining massive standing armies and building the Great Wall centuries before the Roman legions even existed.
So there's a huge gap between the ideal and the reality.
Massive. The literati class viewed generals as coarse, brutal, and unrefined.
So how did the scholars justify spending their lives obsessing over Sun Tzu?
We have a few astonishing defenses of war preserved in the text that attempt to square this circle.
Let's hear them.
The historian Sima Qian gives a blistering defense of military study. He argues that military weapons are the necessary means the sage uses to punish violence and cruelty, to bring peace to troublous times.
Fighting fire with fire.
Right. And he absolutely blasts the pacifist scholars of his own day. He calls them blind to all great issues because they just bark out stale formulas about virtue and civilization while condemning the military.
Sima Qian warns that these naive scholars will bring the country to impotence, dishonor, and invasion.
He uses a great analogy, actually.
What is it?
He says war is like a teacher's rod.
Oh, like corporal punishment.
Yeah. Just as a teacher must sometimes use discipline to maintain order in the classroom, and the state must use punishment to maintain order in society, military chastisement can never be allowed to fall into abeyance in the empire.
Okay, so Tu Mu, our 9th century poet, takes this philosophical leap even further, right?
He really does. He argues that war is simply an extension of the domestic justice system.
That's a bold claim.
He writes that there is no intrinsic difference between flogging a criminal in the marketplace and beheading a traitor on the battlefield.
Wait, really? No difference?
According to him, yeah. Both are just punishments wielded by officials to get rid of wicked people and bring comfort to the good. War, in Tu Mu's eyes, is just macro-level law enforcement.
It's a brutal logic, but it's consistent. Sima Qian is essentially pointing out that you can't actually be a peaceful nation if you can't defend yourself from a violent neighbor.
You're just a victim waiting to happen.
It's like a martial arts master who preaches peace, love, and harmony. They can only afford to preach peace because they know they can end a fight in 5 seconds if someone attacks them.
Exactly. Their peace is underwritten by their capacity for extreme violence.
This raises an important question about how we view civil and military life. The ancient Chinese governing class became terrified of military topics.
They wanted to ignore it.
But the commentators realized that to truly achieve the harmonious, peaceful society that Confucius desired, the brutal pragmatism of Sun Tzu was an absolute prerequisite.
You cannot have harmony without the capacity to defend it against chaos.
But didn't Confucius himself speak out against war? The ultimate twist in this entire debate is how the commentators use Confucius himself to defend the study of war.
Oh, it's brilliant. Because Confucius famously said to a duke, "I have never studied matters connected with armies and battalions."
Right. The pacifists use that line constantly to shut down military study.
But the commentators, particularly Chu Si, point out the historical reality behind the philosophy.
What's the reality?
Confucius wasn't a fragile pacifist. At the famous diplomatic meeting at Chiaku, Confucius ordered warlike preparations that successfully overawed the enemy Marquis of Qi, preventing an ambush.
So he was ready to throw down.
He was. And Confucius is recorded elsewhere as having said, "If I fight, I conquer."
If I fight, I conquer? That completely shatters the image of the purely peaceful sage.
The commentators argue that Confucius wasn't ignorant of war. He just didn't make it the primary subject of his teaching because he preferred civil administration.
Right, it wasn't his favorite topic.
But he implicitly understood that a true sage must exercise both civil and military functions.
That is so relatable, even today. Have you ever avoided a difficult conversation at work or refused to set a strict boundary in a relationship because you told yourself you were keeping the peace?
All the time.
Right. When in reality, by refusing to engage in conflict, you were just rendering yourself helpless and letting chaos win.
It's fake peace.
Yes. The ancient commentators are telling us that the capacity for conflict, knowing how to fight, even if you choose not to, is what actually preserves your peace.
That is the enduring genius of the art of war. It doesn't glorify violence for the sake of violence.
It really doesn't.
It teaches you how to master conflict so thoroughly, so efficiently, that you can dictate the terms of peace.
We've covered incredible ground today. We have a book that survived a gauntlet of fierce translation rivalries.
Pulled from the mud of obscurity by Lionel Giles.
And painstakingly digitized by Bob Sutton.
Yes, the early internet hero.
It was written by a man who was so brilliant at deception that he may have successfully vanished from the historical record, leaving behind only the mythic echo of 180 terrified concubines.
An unbelievable origin story.
Truly. This 13-chapter manual was annotated and carried through time by paranoid warlords and expansive poets, and it was used by scholars to justify the violent preservation of a peaceful society.
I want to leave you with one final provocative concept to mull over.
Lay it on us.
We debated earlier whether Sun Tzu was a real singular man or a myth fabricated by historians.
Right, the ghost author.
But consider this. If Sun Tzu wasn't a single person, but rather an amalgamation.
Like a collect.
Yeah, a collection of centuries of hard-won, bloody lessons learned by countless forgotten commanders dying on the battlefields of ancient China.
Wow.
Does that make the art of war less of a genius's manual? Or does it make it something far more powerful?
Like a crowdsourced text.
Exactly, a crowdsourced, brutally tested mirror of human nature. Does a book need a singular author to hold the ultimate truth about human conflict?
That is a fascinating thought. Sometimes the truth is bigger than one person. It becomes a reflection of the culture that survived it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the origins, the translations, and the enduring legacy of Sun Tzu. May you take these ancient lessons and use them well to navigate the everyday battles in your own life. And the next time you hear someone quote the art of war, just smile and remember the concubines. See you next time.